Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast on wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. There generous fruits that never fail on trees immortal grow. There the rocks and hills and brooks and mills with milk and honey flow. I am bound for the promised land, I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I'm bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land, I'm bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I'm bound for the promised land.
Last year, we were fortunate to have HGP member Sue Emmett give us a glimpse of her life as a Mormon and as an ex-Mormon. They were fascinating programs, and today she's going to address a specific date in Mormon history and its accompanying event. July 24th is celebrated as Mormon Pioneer Day, recognizing the move west by the Mormons, which ties in with the practice of polygamy. Sue will get into that. In fact, Sue is a great-great-granddaughter of Brigham Young and his first polygamous wife. An Oregonian who graduated from college with a BS in psychology and a minor in English, Sue stayed home to raise her 7 children, 2 of whom were adopted. Over the years, she has worked as a substitute teacher, legal assistant, and office manager for the family construction business. In addition, she sold real estate, and today she manages rental properties. After 34 years of marriage, she split from her husband and from the church, which to this day has caused strained relations within the family, as most of her children and 23 grandchildren remain traditional Mormons. Sue is past president of the Ex-Mormon Foundation, an organization whose purpose is to provide information and support for those who have put active membership in the Mormon Church behind them. She is also the permanent chair of its annual conference, which attracts ex-Mormons from all over the world. In her spare time, she enjoys reading, traveling, and home decorating. Please welcome back Sue Emmett.
Well, here I am again. I forgot to update the number of grandchildren. It's now up to 25. Which is, mind-boggling to most people, me too. This talk today started because someone came up to me and asked me about this July 24th celebration that takes place in Salt Lake City and what was that all about. And as was stated, it is a celebration of the arrival of the Mormon pioneers into the Salt Lake Valley. And I will tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. And it is tied in a horrible way to an event that happened a few years ago that's all tied in with the whole polygamy thing. And as all of you know, there's been so much on the news lately about the compound in Texas and about the arrest down there and all the things that have happened. And before we're done today, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the history of polygamy and how that ties into the fundamentalist polygamy that goes on today, and the positions of the mainstream church about all that and what the connections are. And I'd like to start by, this was something that was in the news a couple of weeks ago, from the paper in Salt Lake City, but it said, last month the LDS Church appealed to the news media and the public to make the distinction between it and the fundamentalist LDS Church, whose ranch in Texas has been the subject of so much attention. Mormons have nothing whatsoever to do with this polygamous sect in Texas, said Elder Quentin Cook, a member of the LDS Church's Quorum of the 12. The fact is, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints officially discontinued the practice of polygamy in 1890, 118 years ago. It's a significant part of our distant past, not of our present. And I think you'll see by the time I'm done today that that statement that is a significant part part of the distant past, but not of the present is not a true statement, really. When the Mormons first got to Salt Lake, there was an advance company that went ahead of the main body of saints, and that company consisted of 143 men, including 3 black slaves and 8 members of the existing quorum of the 12 apostles at that time. Now, some of you may be a little familiar with this leadership structure, but at the top of the church there is the prophet, who usually has 2 counselors who assist him, and then underneath them are the 12 apostles, which is modeled after the apostleship that, according to the Bible, that Jesus Christ surrounded himself with. They left winter quarters in April of 1847 is the year that they started out. That was after having been kind of having a fairly long and checkered history of movement from one community to another after the church had been organized. During this trek, they met up with a few other members, including a few more women, and joined together in Laramie, Wyoming. And then they were also joined by members of the Mormon Battalion. Is there anyone here who's ever heard of the Mormon Battalion? Okay. Some of you may not know. It is an interesting piece of American history. When the Mormons were in their camps getting ready to make the trek west, there was a lot going on in the whole Mexico uprising and trying to get California settled and make sure that we were able to get this land away from Mexico. And the Mormons were approached about having the men join with some leadership in the Army and making a trek to California. At the time that was proposed to them, they felt that they were being kind of discriminated against and kind of forced to do it. But Brigham Young made the decision that the payments that would be made to these men could be sent back to the main body of saints and help them with the supplies and the wagons and stuff that they would need for the trek. So there were 500 men, Mormon men, who gathered together, were led by non-Mormon leadership in the Army. But they made the trek from back east all the way across southern United States into California. And it actually was a significant part of the United States being able to acquire those lands in the southern part of the country. And to this day in San Diego, there is a monument there to the Mormon Battalion. And once they finished their obligation to the Army, some of them stayed in California. Most of them begged Brigham Young to take the saints on to California, but he refused to do so. They did end up in Utah. 2 scouts first entered the Valley of Salt Lake on July 21st, 1847. Most of the rest of the party came into the valley on July 22nd. And Brigham Young had been very, very ill for some time and had spent the last couple of weeks of the journey ill in his wagon. But he got out of his wagon and looked down over the valley and said, "This is the place," which is also commemorated in a monument in Salt Lake City. As was noted, I'm a descendant of Brigham Young, and I brought these 2 books because these are my 2 great-great-grandparents. Brigham Young was the prophet at the time. Erastus Snow was one of his 12 apostles, and their 2 children married, and they're my great-grandparents. And my grandmother was actually born in Brigham Young's home in Salt Lake City. Her parents had gone back there to live. And my family owns the binoculars that Brigham Young used when he got out of his wagon and he used the valley, which is, I view that as a precious heritage in one sense, but I don't view it the same way I used to. So this is what's celebrated on the 24th of July in Salt Lake City every year. They have a huge parade, and I don't know if they still have a princess or whatever they used to. Do you remember what they used to call it? Like we do the Rose Festival kind of thing. But they have celebrations all day long, and it's a major event in Salt Lake City, and you don't want to be there or coming in and out of the airport or anything on that day. It's a very busy time.